Have you ever had anything spoiled? And no, I'm not talking about the Alabama fans' season yesterday. I knew that was gonna get y'all rowdy. I knew it. Now, I personally wish both of y'all could have lost. But anyway, but anytime Alabama loses, everybody wins. And all God's people said, amen, for sure, for sure. But have you ever had everybody from Tennessee, like everybody wearing orange right now is like, I love this church. First time guests were in Tennessee, he's like, no, we're gonna be members today. It's like, we don't do membership, we do partnership, but we'll talk at the next steps table afterwards. But I'm not talking about a season. I'm not talking about the milk, the chunky milk that you accidentally poured into your cereal and took a bite. I'm not talking about that, anybody, right? Ninth grade for me, I'm not talking about the rotisserie chicken that you left in the little cooler section of the refrigerator that you forgot about after a year. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that you expected or that you heard or expectations were given to and you were waiting on it or you were looking forward to it and then it got taken away from you. I think about things like TiVo, the original DVR. Can anybody share their age? Remember TiVo, right? Yeah. Everybody under like 25 is like, what? What? No, TiVo. So there was a time where you could record shows and stuff from your TV, not stream them and forget commercials. Like you could fast forward through the commercials. And I thought it was the greatest gift to humanity ever, right? I don't have to watch commercials. And so I'm at my friend Todd Lawless's house on, I think it was 03, 04, 05, don't hold me to that. We can look it up and Google it. National championship game, Texas Longhorns, USC Trojans. Y'all remember that? Vince Young versus Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, maybe the greatest they said ever. And so what we did, because we had church on Sunday night back then, I know, you're welcome. So we had church on Sunday night back then. We had to TiVo the game. Well, so we're probably 45 minutes, maybe an hour behind the game, and I will not mention his name because he still lives in the community. This joker walks in, big Texas fan, he's got his Longhorn stuff in and busts through the doors and is like, let's go, national champions, Vince Young with the run in at the last second. And we're like, bro, we're in the second quarter. So we had to watch the next hour and a half just knowing Vince Young was about to do his little into the end zone for the national championship. Say spoiler alert. Yeah. The internet has spoiled some things. There was a time that the only way you could find out about what a TV show would end or a movie would end is if your friend watched the VCR cassette and then told you about it. Like they rented it at Blockbuster before you did, right? Now you can get, we had, it was Kelsey Ellington, our finance director at 901. 2 years ago, I talked about Iron Man dying during Endgame. And you know what she said afterwards? She goes, you spoiled it for us. I said, I didn't spoil it for you. That movie was 3 years ago. You're late, That was not the same, But that can happen now. You can just get on Instagram and see a picture that would spoil the season finale. Anybody with me? Yeah. I remember my 16th birthday. I was expecting a party when I turned 16, but my parents were kind of getting a little secretive, so they were gonna throw the party. Y'all been there 2 or 3 weeks before the party, right? To throw you off. I tried it one time 2 or 3 weeks after the birthday and it just went terrible. They thought I forgot about it. So 2 or 3, I know for real. And so 2 or 3 weeks before, and it was after church again. We did everything after Sunday night church, I'm on the way to the fellowship hall. Come on, anybody old as SBC? Yeah, the fellowship hall with Trey Desnoyer, by the way, walking. And this old man who is so cool, and I don't think he's with us anymore, named Ira Pilot. Y'all remember him? We're walking, he said, well, boy, why ain't you in there for your party? You skipping out early? I said, what? And Trey's like, yeah, shut up, old man, shut up, So anyway, it's we had to walk, and you could just tell on his face, say spoiler alert. He knew it, yeah. That's what I want to talk about today. Spoiler alert. You see, the church was supposed to fail. Spoiler alert. The church didn't have a chance with what it was up against. Spoiler alert. The church should have been killed off, it should have been. I don't have time in 40 minutes today to give you the entire church history. Matter of fact, some of y'all might like this, some of you might not care less, but I said today was the last week. We're gonna go one more week of Up on This Rock. Yeah, it's just too much and it's good stuff. So I can't give you church history in 40 minutes. So give me 2 weeks and I could do that, but everything it went up against, it should have failed. It should have, it could have, but Jesus made this declaration that the disciples held on to, that the people held on to, that those that followed him truly believed in. He said this in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. You know it. On this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it. Jesus says this. That's so good. That's so encouraging. But we get to see it from this, say it, perspective. Those that were living in it, those that were walking in it, there was a brief time that it was apparent that Jesus was a liar. There was a brief time in history that Jesus was not who he claimed to be, or at least that's what we thought. Yes, he did a lot of good work. Yes, he performed many signs and miracles. And yes, he was a great teacher and a great rabbi, but there was a brief time, this Jesus is not who he said he was. It was about 3 days that obviously what he said wasn't true. That obviously who he said he wasn't true, because he was murdered. And after he was murdered, he was gone. And at this moment in history, there are no Christians. At this moment in history, there are no followers. At this moment in history, there is no church. There are just broken-hearted women, disappointed friends, disillusioned and scared disciples because, watch, Jesus was dead. And if it had all ended, then, watch this is just true, there would have never been the church. Never. No Christians, no gatherings, no Old Testament, no New Testament, no songs, and no services if Jesus would have stayed dead. But here's our faith this morning. Our faith is this, that the story of Jesus did not end on a Roman cross. Matter of fact, the story of Jesus almost began on a Roman cross. At least that's where our story began this morning, because he did not stay dead. I don't know why nobody's clapping right now. I said Jesus did not stay dead. He got up from the grave. Something happened that changed everything. Yes, it was dark. Yes, it was discouraging. Yes, it seemed like all hope was lost, but that only lasted about 3 days, because we read this book and we know that the Gospels say, we know that Matthew and Mark and Luke and John write. We know that the Apostle Paul continues to write. We know that Mark penned this, that the ladies show up to the tomb, that the stone is rolled away, that they walk in and the angel says what? He is not here, for he is risen. He got up. He got up. And then Jesus, this is what changed the trajectory of church history. This is what started church history. This is what changed the trajectory of their lives. After Jesus was not seen in the tomb, he ain't here, he's alive. They leave, they see Jesus alive. They see him alive. They didn't just hear about it. They don't just read about it. They see him alive. And so what happens is followers came out of hiding. They went to Jerusalem and preached in the streets. These men and these women were willing to risk their lives because of what they saw with their own eyes. And so we have the Gospels, but we also have other documents. And that's where Luke writes a document that we call the book of Acts, or the Acts of the Apostles. And he documents the next 30 years following the resurrection of Jesus Christ in this book. This is what Acts says. This is what he writes. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. We've seen it. We spoke to him. We saw him. Crazy. It was amazing. He was like floating up to heaven. Like, I'll be back, I'll be back, I'll be back. We saw it with our own eyes. We haven't just heard about it. He says, you handed him over to be killed, and you disowned him before Pilate, though he had decided to let him go. He's documenting this. You disowned the holy and righteous one and asked that a murderer be released to you. You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead, and we are all witnesses of it. Here's what he says. We didn't just read about it. We didn't just hear it. Listen, our grandparents didn't tell us about this Jesus. We saw him alive. Like, our faith is a firm foundation, not because of something that got passed down to us and we need to pass things down to us. Our faith has a firm foundation because we saw the firm foundation die, but then we saw the firm foundation come back to life. And we believe whatever he tells us is true. That's just what we believe. We saw him alive. We spoke to him. And so because of this, 50 days after the Passover, when Jesus died and rose again, the Jesus movement, the way, as they called it then, or the church on the day of Pentecost began. And so the 12 who were sent out with Peter as the leader started doing exactly what Jesus told them to do right before he left. He dies, he's alive again, and then he says this, hey guys, go preach the gospel. Go tell them about everything you've seen. Go tell them about everything that you've experienced and make disciples. Go. Make it happen. Now, this is where it gets really, really tough for them and where we should look back and be so encouraged, so blessed, and so in awe of the early church's faith. We complain about, we'll get there. We complain about so much stuff these days that I think the early church would laugh at us. Persecuted because you can't post something on social media, bless your heart. It got deleted, oh gosh. I hate it got deleted, but stop talking about you getting persecuted. These guys were beheaded for their faith. Your tweet got taken down. People started following. They started professing Jesus immediately, but what happened was that Christians began to profess Jesus as Lord. No problem, right? Right and wrong, because they started professing that Jesus was Lord, but that meant that they started to deny Caesar as Lord. And that was an issue. So Rome and the Jewish leaders weren't happy about this. And so one guy in particular who hated Jesus' followers more than anybody else was tasked to do something about it. We know him as another name, but he steps onto the history books as Saul of Tarsus. We've talked about him before. The extraordinary thing about Saul of Tarsus is that he was known as the guy who was going to put the church, say the church, out of business. That was like his mission. That was like his passion. That was what he felt called to do. I'm going to put the church out of business. He was a Pharisee. He knew the law and the prophets, our Old Testament, front and backwards. And so he, along with other Jewish leaders and actually a lot of other Jewish people, thought that these Christians were defiling their sacred texts by who they let in and what they were doing with it. And so Saul of Tarsus, with the help of Rome and the Jewish leaders, makes it his life's mission to imprison, to kill, and to get rid of any Jewish person that embraced Christianity, or as they called it, the way. So his mission, his purpose, his calling, if you will, was to end the church. Spoiler alert. Don't you love the Bible? So he starts killing them. He's actually deputized by the Jewish leaders to do so. And so you have this Pharisee, this Jewish leader who knows the law inside and out. He's had enough of this Jesus talk. You've heard about it. He knows what Jewish people are doing. He's even looking at Gentiles and he's so annoyed. And so he starts killing and imprisoning Christians with this hope that it would finally catch on. They would be fearful, they would be scared, and it would end the church. But then the strangest thing happens. He's on the way to a city called Damascus. Some of y'all are smiling because you know this story. And he's on the way, and this is what takes place. Acts chapter 9, recording the next 30 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. As he, Saul of Tarsus, neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? I love this too because Saul's tune changes real quick. Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. He replied, now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Jesus pays Saul of Tarsus a visit. He says, boy, who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? Don't you know who I am, and you're persecuting me? And listen, here's the greatest thing. He doesn't kill him. He doesn't end him because he could have. He saves him. And he trains him. And he calls Saul to be the one who would take the message of Jesus to the Roman Empire, to plant churches all throughout the Mediterranean basin, all throughout the Roman Empire. This Saul of Tarsus, whose purpose, whose priority, and whose mission was to stop the church. Jesus saves him, and now he's the greatest church planter that's ever lived in the history of humankind. Only God. So listen, I don't know why he chose Saul, but I do know this. If he can choose Saul, he can choose you. If he can save Saul, he can save you. If Saul thought he went too far and there was no hope, you did not go too far and there still is hope. Just come back to God today. Come back to Jesus. Hear his voice. Why are you doing what you're doing? And Jesus says, no, listen, there's no condemnation when you come to me. There's forgiveness. There's grace, there's mercy, there's second chances. And so I don't know how, I don't know why, but I do know this, that if Saul could be Saul and God can change him, you can be you and God can change you. And so we transitioned from the role of Pharisee to the role of church planter to the Gentile world. And he began to use his Roman name, Paul. And so we know him now as the Apostle Paul. Now, it's not overselling it to say that his letters that the Apostle Paul wrote to the churches he planted, remember, wanted to end the church, then God said, no, I want you to start churches. His letters to the churches in Ephesus, in Antioch, matter of fact, in Antioch, they gave the Christ followers the way nicknames, Christ followers, Christos followers, Christians, Philippi, Galatia, Rome, the churches that he started there, they have shaped Western civilization. They have shaped the way you and I live our lives. And I don't just mean as Christians, like what he said, what he preferred, what he talked about that we need to change and what we need to do. And so Paul gave the early church this great insight that radically changed their perspective, and it should radically change our perspective. Listen, he says, from now on, don't do things the way you used to do them. People who are just coming to Christ, don't do things the way you used to do them. People that have been in religion for a really, really long time, who've got all the traditions marked, because I talked to some Pharisees, a couple of years ago that was documented, and now you can understand it. Change the way that you're doing those two. Now, from now on, take your cues from Jesus's new covenant command. He says, everything you do, take it from Jesus now. Not a law, not a list, not a to-do list, not a religion, not from the high priest, not the guys that say you've got to look a certain way and act a certain way to be led. He goes, no, take it from Jesus's new covenant command. And listen to me, church, it's a big one. It's a huge one. Jesus says, a new command I now give you. Love one another as I have loved you. You must love one another. So as I have loved you, watch, don't miss this. Jesus says this is the command. As I have loved you, love one another. You don't need 613 commands. Praise Jesus. Listen to this, watch. You don't even need 10. He says you need one, and here it is. Love one another as I have loved you. It's terrifyingly clear. It's terrifyingly simple. Don't do it the old way. Listen, the old way was great. It was even kind and it was polite. Listen, we get our golden rule from the old way. Treat others the way you would want to be treated. Not a bad way to live. Love others the way you would want to be loved. Not a terrible philosophy. Serve others the way that you would want to be served. Sign me up. But Jesus says, no, listen. Treat others the way I treated you. Love others the way I loved you. Serve others the way that I served you. Jesus, why you got to make this so hard for us? Because this is not easy. But how he would demonstrate this new command the very next day after he's told his disciple this would absolutely take their breath away. And here's why. Because it literally took his breath away. They watched their master, their rabbi, their teacher, their friend, their hopes of this Messiah that was going to come and take over. And, they even thought he was going to come and take over Rome. And that's what the Messiah was going to do, the Jewish people, and destroy it and take them from the hands of Rome and rise up and triumph it. But that's not the way it happened. Comes born in a manger and lives as a Jewish carpenter. And then starts leading these 12 rejects for 3 years, but they believed him and they trusted him. And the night before he says, guys, love one another the way I love you. The very next day, they watch him give his life for them. But he got up. And so they see him die. They see him get up. And they literally make this decision. We'll do whatever he tells us to do. We'll say whatever he tells us to say. We'll refrain from whatever he tells us to refrain from. It was contagious. It was irresistible. And so the church, the Jesus followers, started popping up everywhere. Even within the most unlikely places. Churches started popping up within the Roman Empire. Churches started popping up and started meeting in the very place that crucified Jesus. The very place that said, hey, listen, if you follow this guy, this is what happens. And they watched him crucified. But churches started springing up in the Roman Empire. And so they're saying, I know we're getting persecuted. I know you're threatening us. But they said, we don't care. Why? Because they saw Jesus crucified, but then they saw him alive again. The early church lost their fear of death because they saw death defeated with their very eyes. They say, sign me up. And so they started living differently than the world around them. They started loving and serving differently than the world around them. And so the Roman Empire are very, very superstitious people. Much like Stevie Wonder. And so they said, sorry, you're welcome. So they're very, very superstitious people. And so things start going not as planned in the Roman Empire. And so since they are very suspicious, they became very suspicious of Christians. They were radically living differently than everybody else around them. They're just believing and trusting. So they're saying, we will kill you if you keep meeting. And then they killed some of those that kept meeting. And then the others kept meeting, but didn't just keep meeting, they were growing. And so they're scratching their head and they're confused. And listen, this is where Rome comes in. They didn't care who you worshiped. They didn't. Pick your God, do your God. We don't care who you worship. They did care, however, that you profess Caesar is Lord and honor the gods at all cost. Well, Christians said, Caesar's not our Lord, and we only honor one God. And Rome didn't like this. The Romans believed that you must keep the gods happy at all cost. No matter what, keep the gods happy. And so, over the next couple of centuries, things aren't going very good for the Roman Empire. And when things aren't going good, a lot of times leaders or politicians, and I don't want to point fingers, everybody looks for somebody to blame. Is it true? No, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Well, if they would have done something different. And so Rome, it's no different. And so they start looking for someone to blame, and they start blaming, you guessed it, Christians. And they said, we've got to take care of this. We've got to do something about this. And so it really started around AD 54 with Emperor Nero. Around this time, thousands of people are being saved. Thousands of people are calling themselves Christ followers. They are walking in the way. They are leaving behind either Jewish traditions or leaving behind their Gentile world, whatever they've been raised, the many God, the Greek gods, Babylonian, whatever. And they're saying, listen, we want to follow Jesus. Rome did not like this. So at this time, this is when the persecution really got turned up. Listen, thousands and thousands of Christians are killed during this time. They're not just killed. Christians were killed or burnt alive and were used as candles throughout Rome. Stop meeting or you're dead. They met, they were burned alive and used as candles throughout the streets of Rome. They said, you must stop this or we're gonna take away your literature. They kept meeting. You must stop this or we're gonna kill your leaders. They kept meeting. And so while thousands are being killed, thousands more are being added. Peter and Paul actually died around this time in history. Peter was crucified backwards, or upside down, because he said, I don't feel worthy to die the same way as Jesus died. Paul is beheaded during this time. Watch this. The Apostle Paul, Saul of Tarsus, it's recorded not in the Bible that's how he was killed, through history. That's how Saul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, was killed. Beheaded in Rome because of his faith, because he kept preaching. And so for the next 200 years, it's extremely difficult for the church. But they endured through it all. They pressed on through it all. They should have been killed off. They should have ran away. They should have just ended it. But, spoiler alert, right? In the year AD 303, the Diaclinic Persecution takes place. Now that's when Emperor Diocletian issues the largest, bloodiest, state-sponsored persecution towards Christians in the history as we know it. Emperor Diocletian said this: places of worship were to be destroyed. Assembly or gatherings were to be forbidden. Pastors and bishops were to be killed, most of them burned at the stake. And all Christian literature, the writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the Apostle Paul, and others were to be confiscated and burned. And so the church went into hiding. The church did not dissolve. The church did not call it quits, but they started meeting, and they started meeting in hiding. Christian literature was hidden and buried, and Christians would rather die than give up these documents. If you remember about a year ago, I talked about what is the Bible. They weren't giving up the Bible. They weren't protecting the Bible to Biblia at that time. They were protecting just the writings and the documents from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Fragments of what the Apostle Paul might have written. And they would rather die than give them up. But, say spoiler alert, Emperor Diocletian's plan failed. Churches kept getting planted. Christianity continued to spread. Political change brought reform and the easing of hostilities. And then in AD 324, Constantine the Great was named the undisputed emperor of Rome, and he declared that he was a Christian. History would record that his mother actually got converted and saved, and it's still debated to this day, was Constantine's conversion real or was it political? He looked around and he sees that Christianity is rising and more people are becoming Christians, and he thought, maybe I'll sway the vote, whatever, So it's still debated to this day, but regardless, whether it was genuine or not, this was huge for the church. The empire started returning property to Christians. Watch this. Christianity became the preferred religion of the Roman Empire. The same empire that crucified Jesus 2 centuries later, now the majority of the empire would call themselves Christ followers. How? Because the gates of hell will not stand against my church. I've built it, and nothing will stop it. How could this happen? Because 1st and 2nd century Christians didn't have just documents that Luke wrote. They didn't just have documents that John and Mark and the Apostle Paul wrote. They didn't just read what Matthew wrote. They believed And they built their life on what Matthew wrote. On this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. They believed all hell could come against them. They believed that all hell could come against their life, their families. But when Jesus said that not even the gates of hell can overcome, they were able to look at Rome, they were to look at any adversity they have and truly just say, bring it on, bring it on. They believed when the Apostle Paul wrote, to live is Christ. Like I'm pursuing him and I'm loving him and you're not gonna stop me. And even if you think you stop me and you kill me, I get to be with him. So bring it on. They had no fear. They had purpose. They had mission. They knew their priorities. They believed what they heard and they believed what they read. I watched a video about, 4 or 5 years ago, and it went into an experience that I saw or that I had about 10 years ago that I'm gonna talk about in just a minute. But I want you guys to see this video, and I want you to sit up. I don't want you to fall asleep, and I want you to watch what Pastor Wayne Cordero talks about with the church in China. Check this out.
Let me finish with this story. We go to China from time to time, and we train leaders. And this time we brought up 22 leaders from the Hunan province, and they rode 13 hours on a train to get to a hotel that they came up 2 by 2 in these elevators so as to not draw any attention. And then they got to a hotel room, a little apartment room. It's only about 700 square feet in the little living room, no air conditioning, hardwood floor, 22 sat there. I came in, and when you teach in China, you start at 8 in the morning and you don't get done till 5 at night. You teach the whole day. They were sitting there, all 22 of them, and I looked around and I said, now, if we get caught, what will happen to me? They said, oh, you'll get deported in 24 hours and we'll go to prison for 3 years. I said, you're kidding. How many of you have been in prison for your faith? Out of 22, 18 raised their hands. I thought, no way. And I looked at him and I said, you 22 people, how many people do you oversee? Because they were all of these small group leaders, underground church leaders in the Hunan province. I said, how many, if you counted up all the people under your jurisdiction, how many would it be? And they counted them up and they said, little over 20 million. I said, what? See, we forget there's 1.3 billion people in China. This is crazy. Well, I had 15 Bibles and I passed them out. Obviously 7 didn't get them. And I said, let's turn to 2 Peter chapter 1 and we're going to read it. And just then one lady handed hers to somebody next to her. And I thought, interesting. Well, we turned there anyway, and as we started reading it, I understood why she gave it away. She had memorized the whole thing. She just recited the whole chapter. When it was done, I went over to her at a break and I said, you recited the whole chapter. She says, oh yes, I've memorized many chapters. I said, where did you memorize so many chapters? She said, in prison. I said, you have much time in prison. So I said, but don't they confiscate the Bible? She said, yes. So people bring in scriptures written on pieces of paper and they bring it in. So I said, but then if they find that piece of paper on you, won't they confiscate that? She said, oh yes, that's why you memorize it as fast as you can. Because even though they can take the paper away, they can't take what's hidden in your heart. I thought, wow. Well, after 3 days, you fall in love with these people. And when it was done, I said, how can I pray for you? I'm going to go back to America, and you guys have been just so wonderful. How can I pray for you? They said, you know, Wayne, you guys can gather like this whenever you want to in America. We can't. Could you pray that one day we'll be just like you? And I looked at him and I said, I will not do that. Big incredulous eyes looked at me and they said, why? I said, because you guys rode a train for 13 hours to get here. In my country, if you've got to drive more than an hour, people don't come. You sat on a wooden floor for 3 days In my country, if people have to sit more than 40 minutes, they leave. You sat not only here for 3 days on a hard wooden floor, but you did it without air conditioning. In my country, if it's not padded pews and air conditioning, people don't often come back. In my country, we have an average of 2 Bibles per family. We don't read any of them. You hardly have any Bibles, and you memorize them from pieces of paper. I will not pray that we become like, you become like us, but I will pray that we become just like you.
I had a similar experience take place in Georgia about 10 years ago. Whitney and I had just been married. I was leading worship and training at this gym, and that's so emotional watching that. And I have a friend named David George, who we support and will continue to support, who's doing a great work in Cuba. And Cuba's just a different world. In South America, it's just a different world. And he brings in a friend, and I'd known David for about a year or so, and I knew he was in ministry and knew he traveled and he preached. Well, he brought in a friend, little Cuban guy named Manuel. And we start talking and we're catching up, and Manuel has extreme broken English, and he says to me, and this is the time, I'm called to ministry. At this time, I've been called to plant a church, and pastor a church, and everything you learn, you put your priorities on, all the stuff that creates a great experience that we'll never stop doing. But even all this becomes complicated sometimes. It does. The lights, the music, your cushion seat. We're going to keep doing it, keep giving you a great experience, because it's not for you, it's for people that don't know Jesus. We want to create a great experience for them to come back and then give them Jesus. But this just becomes complicated sometimes. It does. And I'm planning this church, and I'm getting ready to plant the church, and I've got the list of everything I need. Got to buy the sound system first, of course. I'll pray later. I got to prepare, the sermon, and we'll figure all that out later. We got to paint the walls, and I've just got the list. I'm truly like, the list goes on and on and on. And I meet Manuel in the gym, and David says, Manuel, he's a pastor. He said, I want you to ask him the same thing you asked me on the way back from the airport yesterday. Manuel, no, he's like, no, ask him. He's like, it's okay. He's like, he'll help you with the answer. Manuel says, and I'm not going to do his accent, but he says, Mr. David, Pastor David, he said, people here don't go to church when a football game is on TV. And he starts crying. And he says, why? They suck. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry. I was like, consistently, And I said, man, it's I don't think people miss every week, and sometimes, David bumped him, keep asking. He goes, Mr. David, say, some people here in America don't go to church because, this is what he said. So my teachings and my belief, you'll probably hear this spill out from this wrecked conversation I had with Manuel 10 years ago. He said, people in America, they don't go to church because they play baseball. I say, yeah, they do. And again, and I'm trying to defend us. Not every, there's like seasons and stuff, and there's committed, but yeah. And he starts crying. He said, growing up, he said, we would walk to church. He said, many times we would be arrested going to church. He said, if we were caught with the Bible, we would be beaten. He said, I watched my mom and my dad. And he goes, people here, Mr. David says, they don't read the Bible. I said, bro, why don't you plant the church? Like, I didn't know what to say, But I'm telling you, like, you ever had defining moments of your life that you're shaped forever by them? Manuel shaped me that day. And this is what I'm reminded by, even today with a church with a lot of people that come. And God's called you to lead it, and you've got a vision for it, and we are not staying here. We're grateful for that all that God has done. We just believe he's not done. I'll believe that till I die. But I think that we have, not just 901, I'm talking to the universal church. We've forgotten what church is. We have. Because when you ask somebody even where they go to church, that building, there. And listen, there's a universal church. We'll talk a little bit about that next. In the local church, you need to be involved in the local church. But the church cannot fail. The church will prevail against anything. I'm going to tell you, listen, this is not a guilt trip because it's wrecked me this week. And that's why we pray as a staff when there's no lights on, there's no people around, because we're begging God to bring people. People don't serve at church because they've forgotten what the church is. This is not a volunteer program. You don't get college credit for this. Actually, you do, but that's not why you do it. She interned this summer, but like, people don't give to the church. I'm going to say this because we've forgotten what the church is. Man, not taking my money. What? We're trying to plant other churches and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. What are you talking about? You know what? Keep your money. Because if you don't give it, if that's your heart, God can't bless it. But God says we want to continue to fund the mission of the gospel. People will run into their neighbors every single week and have every single opportunity to invite them to a place, a gathering, an assembly. We'll talk next week. It's not a building, it's a people. People's lives are being ruined, ending their lives, giving up on their marriages, throwing in the towel. It's an opportunity for us to be the church outside of four walls. And so this is like my response today. And the band is going to play, but I just want you to close your eyes for a moment, if you will, and just ask, as we read in Revelation, as the Apostle Paul wrote, Lord, take me back to my first love. What I didn't just preach is don't go on vacation or watch a football game. Please, even if that's what you heard, and I'm dead serious, come and talk to me after. That's not what I mean. But when this has become unimportant to us, our kids are saved here. Our kids are prayed for in a place like this, instructed, helped. Our marriages are restored here. So I want you to just ask the Holy Spirit to take you back to your first love. I want you to ask the Holy Spirit, as David wrote, renew a steadfast spirit within me, O God. Create in me a clean heart. Remember what you used to care about. If you don't know, come back and this is what you should care about. I think sometimes we don't serve at the church is because we have the wrong perspective. Guys, we don't need you to volunteer. We just don't. We don't. The church is not a place to serve. The church is a place that you should be at service. It's not a service. You are to be at service. Whatever is needed, Lord. To let the Holy Spirit work on your heart. And if it's not this church, wherever your church home is, we say words like get all in and like just forget all that. Just be a part of the church. Do what Jesus said to do. Crucify yourself, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow him so that other people can take up their cross and follow him. So God, I pray you would speak to us, continue to speak to me. Let us remember what is truly important. Let us remember what this is, what it's for. Let us remember that Jesus died for it and that others died for it so that we could gather today and have it. That should bring us to our knees in gratitude. Lord, may we never forget, and if we did, bring us back. Renew that steadfast spirit within us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Everybody said together, amen. Come on, let's sing it.